Hello YouTube, and welcome to another Linux First Impressions. Today we are looking at Fedora. Now the reason why I wanted to look at Fedora is because a few weeks back I looked at Scientific Linux, a Red Hat edition, and I'll be honest with you, I was very disappointed. Now, the reason for most of my disappointment was not because it was a bad OS, but because my expectations of something called Scientific Linux were completely wrong when it came to that particular distribution. For instance, I really expected something called Scientific Linux to have a lot of scientific themes to it, to have software that was based on chemistry and physics and other applications that would enable you to be able to do scientific tasks much more efficiently. Instead, what I got was pretty much a bare version of Linux with outdated GUI software, outdated applications, and things that I haven't seen around for maybe years even. That's how bad it was. Now, I had a few people talk to me since then and explain that, well, you know, Red Hat is very secure, and they'd like to sacrifice product advancement for stability and security, so that's why they do that. Well, personally, I don't think you have to sacrifice that much just to create a stable environment. Now, I do understand trying to create a uniform environment, but there are so many other flavors of Linux out there that give you a much better impression and still can use some of the newer software out there. Now, that being said, this is not Red Hat. This is Fedora. Now, Fedora is the project that spun from Red Hat when Red Hat decided to go towards the enterprise Linux and say that they no longer wanted to support the desktop environment. Well, that's fine. Fedora is supposed to be the fix for my complaint with what Red Hat Scientific Linux was. And I thought it only fair to take a quick look at Fedora to see how it does really compare. We have here Fedora 20, and Fedora 20 is what I found to be the latest. The installation, I still feel, is a little lacking. The reason being that when you go to do your partitioning and your hard drive setup, it can be very confusing. You have to pay strict attention to what you need to have happen for your partitions when using Fedora's installer, and I found that to be a little daunting and would be daunting for a new user, so you might want to watch out for that. That's just something that I think is very rough around the edge. I just don't like I've installed a lot of distributions, and there are a few that I really have complaints about, other than the fact that some just aren't proper and blow up your system if you're not careful. Now, I install these things in a live environment with other operating systems because if something wants to blow up, and something does blow up, which has happened in the past, I want to be able to share that with you. You cannot get that perspective when you're in a virtual environment, which is not to say that virtual environments do not have their place. There have been many times that I have just not been able to get certain software to work that I wanted to showcase in it, so I had to use it in a virtual environment just so I could get something, say, for instance, recording to work or screen capture, etc., etc. But I do like to make sure that things work in their native environment first. Other than the disk partitioning and getting things prepped for your hardware, everything else within Fedora's installation is pretty good. No other complaints to go from that. Everything installed. It even allowed me to change the way my booting was, so that if I did not want to use Fedora as my boot manager, I could fix that. Let me fix a quick sound issue on my other laptop here. There we go. Hopefully I've got 3 laptops all sitting around me, and of course my phone, so hopefully they don't make too much noise and distract us during our review. So because of that, I really give it a positive for the grub. You know, I think 2 weeks ago, the last one I did with Olympus Lite screwed up all my grub, and I left it and didn't bother with it. I fixed it now so that my Gen 2 on this laptop is my default, and I liked having Gen 2 with the grub legacy manage my booting. I don't like for other distributions to take that over, especially if they don't even ask permission to do so. Fedora, however, did a great job with that. And the only other negative that I might say about Fedora is I am not a GNOME 3 fan, and you will see here that we have GNOME 3 and all of its gory. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and I still don't like it. This has, however, been very stable. If you are a GNOME 3 user enjoyer, then you will be happy with this. The good thing about this, however, is just like any other Linux distribution, if you do not like the GUI, you can always do some research and figure out how to install KDE, XFCE, even LXDE if you really wanted to. It's just something that gives you choice, which is one of the better things about Linux. Another thing that I want to discuss right now is a post that someone actually placed on my Scientifics Linux, where they were talking about how they're a Windows user, they want to get into Linux, and they were concerned about the sacrifice of stability and all that. Do they have to worry about antiviruses? Do they have to worry about other issues in regards to, say, for instance, Red Hat? Why was I being so negative, for instance, with Red Hat? And my point to them was that Linux doesn't have to be crippled to be stable. There are some excellent products out there with Linux, such as Debian-based distributions, or even Slackware-based distributions, Gentoo, Arch, etc., that have much newer packages in their repositories and are just as stable and just as usable. Now, I just don't feel the need to make things stuck in an old yesterday world just so you can call it stable. That's just not necessary. And the nice thing about Linux is you don't need an antivirus software package. You don't need all the spyware slash junk protection that you need in a Windows environment, and possibly even in a Mac environment. I don't know Mac that well, but I can speak from experience, at least with Windows, that if you don't have that, you will end up with viruses, you will end up with all kinds of junk from the internet ruining your system. You do not need to worry about that within Linux. It is a safe environment, a good environment to be in, a much better environment. You still do need to create and make sure that you have a firewall and that you're protecting your security. You still have to worry about people possibly trying to hack into your system so that they can grab files and personal information. That is a flaw of everything, which is not indicative of the operating system, but of the society that we live in today. Now, going back into here, Fedora, we are in their application tray, and as you can see, it is quite minimal. We do not have very many things. It comes with the basics of what you might expect. Firefox, LibreOffice. I installed QD4 because I installed the simple screen recorder. I installed GUVC viewer, however it did come with cheese, and I probably could have used cheese. Just not a very big fan of cheese. Say cheese! I installed the Grub Customizer because I was trying at first before I went into Gen 2 and just fixed my Grub booting, because when I did install Fedora, my Grub was all screwed up from what Limpus Lite did to mess it up. Moving on, evolution for your email. To name just a few more things. Picture editing, your settings, etc., etc. Inside of software. Now this was a little disappointing. Let me tell you, there are some things in here that maybe it's just too advanced. I mean, they're thinking about the layman. They're thinking about the guy who just wants the applications, but he's not. The people who set this up aren't thinking about, the people like me who need to install GCC or C++, that sort of thing. I type in GCC, for instance, and do a search on it, and I'll get QDeveloper or QDevelop, or and that's an IDE. That's not that's a developing environment. That's not GCC. And when I went to install, of course, the software for Simple Screen Recorder, I have to compile that, and so I need to make sure I've got a development set up with GCC, C++, etc., etc. And those things I had to go into command line to do. So this is really set up for someone who is just like, oh, I want to play games. I want to go to audio and see, Audacious is going to be there. Audacity's there. Rose Garden, so I can hook it up to my keyboard and do cool stuff. It's got all those kind of applications in here. Disk printing software, I'm sure. Of course, it's all GNOME based. I don't see, for instance, K3B, which is one of my favorites from KDE, to do stuff in. But they've got a good selection of this. I mean, it's not the best selection, but it is a selection. And while we talk about selections, another strange thing about Fedora that kind of gets under my skin, that kind of bothers me just a wee bit, and that is Firefox is all nice. That's okay. I used Firefox for a long time. Of course, when in the days when I think I was more of a SeaMonkey fan back in the way back, and for some reason, I don't remember why, I ended up getting pushed into having to use Firefox, and I kind of complained about it a bit many years ago. But I find it's okay now, and I don't have any problems. But recently, I have grown accustomed to Chromium. Now, granted, Chromium is Google's web browser, but I love the way it handles my bookmarks and how if I log into Chromium with my Google account, and once again, Google kind of creeping in all my world, which kind of bothers me just a wee bit, but still, I like the fact that if I log in there and I set up bookmarks and all that, no matter what operating system I jump into, all I have to do is open up Chromium, log in, and all my bookmarks, all my favorites, everything just kind of sits there, and I don't have to worry about what system did I bookmark that on and can I get back to it, because sometimes I do research on my test environment, sometimes I'm doing research on my other laptop, and it integrates everything all at once, and I really like that, and it's very good. However, inside of Fedora, there is no Chromium package. And I have read that there are some weird dependency issues that the good people at Fedora cannot figure out. And while there is an external repository somewhere, for Fedora 20 they have not built a package yet for Chromium. And that seems kind of silly to me. When I can go to Debian, I can go to Arch, I can go to Gentoo, I can go to Slackware, I can go to just about any other distribution out there, and it is not an issue whatsoever to get Chromium installed using just a simple package. And yet Fedora seems to have a problem with that. Now Fedora, I found too, has a problem with a lot of things. And in fact, for me to be able to set up this system so that I could install Simple Screen Recorder and get a few other things that I wanted to use within the applications, I had to update the repositories and install RPM Fusion for Fedora 20. Now, that to me just shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to install a third-party repository just so you can find the applications that you want. There are so many applications out there, and I understand that you can't support all of them, but there are a large core of applications that you should always be able to support. And unfortunately, Fedora kind of has that Red Hat attitude of, no, we just have this core set, and while it's supposed to be bleeding edge, we choose not to pick some stuff up and put it into there. So you're going to have to go to a third party to get to it. It reminds me of the old days, and when I'm talking old days, I'm talking about Red Hat in the 90s. When you would install Red Hat, you get it up and running, and then you'd have to go download about another 500 megs to a gig of data just to make it usable. Now Fedora is much better than that, I will say. It is much better than that. But it still gives you a headache. I mean, if you really want to go Red Hat distribution, go for Fedora over anything Red Hat, because Red Hat now is, like I said, an enterprise Linux, which is for businesses, servers, etc. Fedora is still their desktop brand. But if you're looking for Linux that you can do so much more on, stick to a Debian-based distribution, stick to a Slackware-based distribution, although Slackware is getting into an advanced area that is a little difficult, and they still have a lot of package problems in my opinion. Debian out there, I mean, people ask me all the time, what are your favorite distributions? Now by far, I say Gentoo to the max. But let me tell you, Gentoo is not for the faint of heart. It's a lot like Linux from scratch, and I have installed Linux from scratch. Gentoo is awesome. It is customizable. It is source-based. You have to compile everything. It is great. It is not for everyone. My suggestion for those of you just starting out and trying this, as much as I hate to say it because I am not a fan of what Mark Shuttleworth is doing right now, but Ubuntu is still the best beginner distribution setup, and you can advance your knowledge from beginner state to a more advanced state within Ubuntu. I have had a lot of problems in the past though with doing major updates with Ubuntu and blowing up the system, but it is very simple to install, very simple to learn. And then afterwards, I would say the next step up would be to go to Debian. Debian is awesome. I love most every Debian-based distribution I've ever played with, tested, or reviewed. So that is great to go into those. Now, as you move yourself up, then I would say next would be Arch-based distributions. Start installing what you want with just the minimum of what you want using Arch, which is a lot like Gentoo, except you don't have to do all of the package sourcing and compiling. But you can pick and choose the way you like it. Fedora, for the most part, it has that nice look and it has that nice feel to it. And it has the package manager there. And if we go into anything else, I'm not sure if there's much else I wanted to point out here. Everything is what you would need to run an operating system, and it does a good job. It's much more stable than any of the other GNOME 3 distributions that I have tested out. I'm just not crazy about GNOME 3. And for the most part, if Red Hat style RPM packaging is what you're liking the most, versus apt-get or portage or some of the others that are out there, then Fedora is a good way to go. So as I always say, if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for watching this long rant, raving, whatever you want to call it, on Fedora 20. You're getting close to 20 minutes now, so y'all have a great whatever you're having. Talk to you later. Bye, guys.